Hi friends! This is part 2 of a 2-part video series. In part 1 I investigated and I described the wet on wet watercolor technique, while in this part I will instead explain the wet on dry technique. I hope you will enjoy it. Alright, we are back. Our painting is completely dry, so the painting looks nice even like this, so we don't have to necessarily add another layer on top. But since we want to learn how to use the wet on wet and wet on dry technique, we will add another layer through the wet on dry technique. We can use the same brush if we would feel like, but usually when I add the details I like to use thinner brushes, either my size 6 or a size 2 round brush. It's up to you. You can experiment and see what you like to do more. For example, we can add a few details on the leaves. For example, the way I like to proceed is to create a darker green and add a few details. That means a few strokes on leaves that are completely dry. I've created, for example, this darker green, and using the point of my brush, the tip of my brush, I can create some very thin if we like. So very thin strokes. I can add some details here. Strokes that are using the belly of my brush. I'd like to try to change into my size 2 and see how it feels, because of course it's a smaller brush. It has a different feeling and you can achieve different strokes in with different pressures. So I'm making this green a bit more yellow because I noticed this is a yellower sort of leaf, and I can add a few strokes here. There isn't a rule on how to do this. This is up to you whether you like it. Even you don't have to do this if you don't want. You can change the value, then create these layers on top. For example, here with this yellow green, you can create strokes. All right. For me, the leaves are done. So I do not wish to add further details. When we feel good with it, we can, for example, start with more details if we want on the roses. I can add a few strokes here as well on the roses, but I have to say I particularly like them even as they are, so I might, like in another, if this was not a tutorial, I might have left even these roses as they are because I think they are pretty. I like very much the bleeding effects of all of these colors, so I repeat, this is not something that needs to be done in all the cases. For example, starting from this rose that is more towards the red color, if you remember we used Scarlet Lake and Yellow Ochre, I will add a bit of Scarlet Lake with this very thin brush, number 2, and I will just add a few details in the center in particular, a few strokes, just to define better these petals. And as you can see, I'm using the tip and then the belly of my thin brush in order to create these round shapes for the petals. You don't have to do it everywhere, you can do it just in some areas where you feel comfortable doing that, or where you feel like the paint needs that. I'm gonna add a bit of yellow ochre in order to have the red less intense, and I will now try to add a few strokes, maybe towards the external part of these leaves, of these petals. It's to give the impression that there are more petals. And I like how this is turning out to be. It's a good thing to learn when to stop, to add details. This is still a loose style composition, so I don't want to add even too many details. Like this for this rose I think is good, and I like the effect. I think I will stop. I can start to work on the first rose we painted, and this rose has opera rose as a color and mixed with a bit of ochre, yellow ochre. So I'm going to start from the center because I usually like the center to be darker. I'm taking a bit more opera rose. More yellow ochre, and now I can add a few details, maybe in the external petals. Remember that you can change the value of the color you're using by removing pigment into water. I like to have a few strokes that are much darker, brighter. In this case, this is the pure opera rose color. Maybe we can add a bit more details here. And then, for example, on these petals on top, they are more towards the yellow ochre color, but they are very, very light, so I will just use a bit of yellow ochre to give them more, to add color and details, but very light. Here I'd like maybe here a few strokes with the belly of my brush. And I think I like how the result of this simple composition is. I wouldn't add any more detail, and I hope you enjoyed. So this is it. This is the second video of a two-part video series, where in the first one I explained the wet on wet technique, and in this video you just finished to watch, I explained the wet on dry technique. If you have missed the first part, this is the link, and I will also link it in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.